The law usually decides the sentence of criminals, but these ones set their own fate. First up is Chris McNabb, who was in court for the murder of his own 15-day-old daughter, Kalaya. It started in Georgia on October the 7th, 2017, when Kalaya was reported missing, but then later found in a body bag, with her father, Chris McNabb, on the run in the woods, with the excuse that he was looking for her. Things became clearer when Chris and his wife, Courtney Bell, were apparently doing meth the day before Kalaya was murdered, with Bell herself saying, "I am guilty because I did drugs, but I ain't ever seen this coming. That's my baby. I went to put her to sleep and I woke up and she was gone." Since it's impossible for a 15-day-old child to just disappear on her own, it was reported that baby Kalaya was beaten to death, since her autopsy showed extensive head trauma and a seriously disfigured skull. Since Bell was supposedly sleeping during what happened, McNabb became the prime suspect. But first, Bell received her own penance in the form of second-degree murder, child cruelty, and felony contributing to the dependency of a minor charges, landing herself 15 years in prison and an additional 15 years probation. However, her murder conviction was overturned in 2022. Chris McNabb, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. In court, he tried his hardest to defend himself. He was an adamant believer that he was innocent, despite his demeanor really not helping him.
I'm innocent. I didn't do it.
Okay.
I've maintained that the whole time. I feel like there was things that were allowed to be said that should have never been allowed to be said that didn't have nothing whatsoever to do with the case and what was being said.
McNabb unintentionally shot himself in the foot when he claimed that domestic violence against his wife somehow shouldn't lead people to believe he would hurt his child.
Just because somebody has domestic abuse issues with their spouse doesn't mean that they would put their hands on their kids, which has also been pretty much proved that I've never touched my kids in any harmful manner whatsoever. I've never harmed my kids.
This was before he shot himself in the foot again, but in a major way, when the absolute savage of a judge asked him,
You claim you're innocent, so you tell me what sentence the man or woman that you claim did this should receive.
McNabb proudly stated in response,
If you ever find out who did them, they deserve to be under the jail.
Okay, so they ought to get the maximum sentence.
Most definitely.
Okay.
and to his absolute shock, the judge did exactly what McNabb said.
On the crime of malice murder, I sentence you to life in confinement without parole. On concealing the death of another, I sentence you to 10 years of confinement, consecutive or after. Count one. Do you understand each of your sentences?
Yes, sir.
While McNabb didn't request his sentence willingly, Stephen Lorenzo asked for the harshest one. This story started all the way back in 2003 in Tampa, Florida, when Stephen Lorenzo was arrested and tried for the murder of two men, Michael Schultz and Jason Galehouse, as well as the drugging and raping of 7 other men. Stephen and his accomplice, Scott Schweikart, had a twisted fantasy of torturing and killing men, and their hunting grounds became gay clubs where they carried out their horrors. At one point, Scott admitted that they dismembered Jason Galehouse and scattered his remains in plastic bags all over Tampa. It seems their fantasies were not just murderous, but downright psychotic. As for Schultz, he was raped, murdered, and left to rot in his Jeep. Stephen Lorenzo was arrested in 2004 and in 2006. He received justice in the form of a 200-year life sentence. While that might have been closure for the family of the victims, apparently it wasn't to Lorenzo himself, who in 2022, a decade and a half later, decided he wanted the death sentence.
I'm seeking the death penalty.
Lorenzo had a certain philosophy that he passionately shared in court. The way he was so polite and articulate would make anyone think he was requesting a lighter sentence, not literal death.
In this lifetime, I'm the bad guy, you're the good guy. Maybe the next lifetime the role will be reversed, who knows. But I want to let you know that I wish you all well.
He claimed he would be more comfortable on death row.
It's in my best interest, basically, because it's a comfort. I'll be living a lot more comfortable than I would in the federal system, living on death row, believe it or not.
At the end, he proved he was as spiritual as he was a rapist and a murderer when he claimed he'd be back in a new body.
The sooner that I get euthanized, as far as I'm concerned, the faster I can get the sooner I can fetch myself a new body and come back again, a fresh body. That's how I look at it, because that's how it is. That's how it's spiritual work. We're eternal beings.
The judge gave him what he wanted, but made sure to mention it was at the request of the victim's mother, not his.
That translates to, I sentence you, Mr. Lorenzo, to death. That is the punishment that you deserve for these horrific crimes.
Can't give a criminal the satisfaction of acceptance. Apparently, the death penalty is more popular as a request than anyone might believe, since Scott Nelson had the same request. In Orlando, Florida, Scott Nelson was on trial for the murder of 56-year-old nanny Jennifer Fulford. Unfortunately, she was caught in the crossfire when Nelson antagonized his probation officer after a robbery, claiming that he was the reason he lost his job and his house.
I have flashbacks to this very day. I've had cockroaches running over my body. I've been beaten. I've been raped. I've been everything in prison.
And yet you did
And now I'm out in the free world, and this guy rips everything up.
Whether it was to make a statement or pure lunacy, Nelson kidnapped Jennifer, stole her car and bank card, and eventually stabbed her to death. Nelson proved to be more direct than anyone might expect, still using his probation officer rival as his excuse. In court, Nelson's experience in prison became the hot topic, both by him and against him. He tried to victimize himself with the prison conditions, as if what happened to him justified the murder of an innocent woman.
They turned me into an animal. I've been beaten. I've been chained to beds for days that are ripped. I've been locked in cells that are so stifling hot. I have flashbacks to this very day. I've had cockroaches running over my body. I've been beaten. I've been raped. I've been everything in prison.
On another occasion, Nelson was under attack, being criticized for his way around Muslim inmates. He got very defensive and almost threw a fit in court.
Mr. Nelson has shown no adverse effects from social housing.
You can't call me. You need to take a moment, Mr. Nelson. You need to take a moment with your attorneys. Hold on, sir. Sir. Members of the jury, Mr. Nelson. Mr. Nelson. Mr. Nelson.
Everything culminated in Nelson asking for the death penalty, favoring that over life in prison.
Mr. Nelson, do you want to be sentenced to death?
Yes.
I object. That's an improper question.
I'll sustain the objection.
He wouldn't get his wish, however, and fate had it that he got the life sentence that he dreaded so much. Speaking of politely asking for execution, Scott Dozier made his own requests. Before Dozier was tried and punished for one murder, though, he was exposed for another one in Arizona, where he shot and killed Jason Green, who threatened to expose Dozier's meth operation. Now, Dozier had 2 murder charges on his hands, with 2 separate trials. After he was sentenced to over 20 years for just one murder, Dozier had a shocking request in court. Realizing that he'd rather die than spend the rest of his life in prison, he very politely asked for the death penalty.
My outlook on this is that personally, I'm not that concerned with it. I think once they get started, they're going to get it done one way or another. If it's ideally it'd not be terrible and painful, but if it is, I'm kind of committed at that point.
The look of shock on the other inmates' faces says it all, but the judge wasn't going to let such a polite request be rejected.
Are you sure this is what you wish me to do?
I am, yes, 100% sure.
Okay, the record should reflect I've signed the first supplemental warrant of execution, setting the execution date as required by statute the week of October 16, 2017, and the first supplemental order of execution.
Shockingly, though, Dozier must have been impatient, as he didn't wait for his execution day and committed suicide in his cell. Out of all of these killers, though, it seemed like Peter Absu will escape death. In Fort Lauderdale, Florida, couple Kevin Powell and Stephen Adams responded to a suggestive Craigslist ad by Peter Absu. When Absu went to their home, however, he murdered both men by riddling their bodies with bullets. After stealing their SUV and escaping, Peter was found mainly due to his own mother reporting him to the police.
I have no regrets in my life, and I'm proud of every decision I've ever made. Nobody here knows what really happened that day.
During his trials, Peter showed his true colors in extreme, disturbing fashion. In a letter sent to the judge, he exhibited white supremacist ideas, hinting that he killed Powell and Adams for being homosexual. In interviews, Peter suggested that he would kill again. He seemed to relish in murder.
And I plan on hurting people. I wholeheartedly have nothing to lose, and I'm going to take it out on everybody I can.
Peter even described how easy it would be for him to kill someone.
But it's really easy to talk somebody into teaching them jiu-jitsu, putting them in a choke, and just holding on too long. And there's nothing they can do about it.
It all culminated in Peter asking for the death penalty, but not before he made provocative gestures towards a victim's family.
In my heart of hearts, I knew that he was making that gesture to us, because I said to my husband right away, I think he just flipped us off.
Whether due to fate or luck, it seemed like Peter's time wasn't up yet, as his sentencing got complicated twice. Once due to his mother's testimony being remote, and the second time was for jury misconduct, with one of the jurors watching a documentary about the case before the verdict. Peter is still awaiting his sentencing, 13 years after the crime was committed.